Again of Christian Interviews today. I'm your host, Jim Zimmer. Normally what we talk about on Christian Interviews is we interview usually authors. We like to stick with prayer, revival, and marriages. Of course, those are my sacred things I like to talk about. But you know what's pretty interesting, folks, is this voter thing that's going on in Florida. It is so wild. There's a lot of prophetic utterances about it, and some things that are happening that if you look into the spiritual realm of it, you wonder if it's a spiritual battle, good against evil almost. There's just so many dynamics involved. There's a lot of revival happening in Florida, and it's so strange that this is the place that could pull out our president. And I was praying today that I'd like to come on the air with something fresh and new and something, you know, for the local ability. And if you'd like to be, our local population, if you'd like to be on Christian Interviews today, give us a call, 928-7707. We'll talk a little bit about it. But a man walked in just as I basically, to tell you the truth, folks, I was praying about it. And he walked in, and he is Gary Tomlinson. Gary Tomlinson used to work for the American Express Advantage Tech Group, which basically looked into fraud in American Express through signatures. He's basically one of those type of guys, believe me, you just look at this guy and you think computer geek. That's what you think. And he walked in, he says, is there anybody here who would like to talk about some of the voter stuff that's going on and a Christian point of view and what's really going on? Well, this man was given the opportunity to look into the voting record of the Dianne Feinstein and Michael, what was it, Gary?
Michael.
But he was, you were commissioned, now let me get that straight. Were you commissioned to do this, or you just had the opportunity that Governor Wilson said, okay, you're the guy, let's find out what's going on with the voting record in what county?
This was in Los Angeles County in 1994.
This was in 1994. Now, you said to me that you actually got to withhold the counting vote. I mean, you had a 3-day stay of counting. They couldn't count the vote until you completed your assessment. Is that true?
Yes, sir. If I would have had a little more preparation, I would have brought the 2 or 3 LA Times articles that I wasn't mentioned by name, just as a quote-unquote independent computer consultant that provided the data.
Now, you have an educational background at the University of Long Beach and the University of California at Irvine. Now, you don't have a graduate degree or a degree in computer science, is that correct?
No, sir, but I've taken graduate level work at both universities.
Okay, so we just don't want to, we don't want to fraudulently say that you're some kind of real big computer guy, but basically you are. I mean, you have a lot of background in it. You've also were on a committee with Ross Perot, right?
Yes, sir. The United We Stand people contracted with me to develop a system that would implement Mr. Perot's idea of the electronic town hall. And in essence, I had 4 meetings with Mr. Perot. And the bottom line of the last meeting, I told him that his idea of voting by telephone would and could not ever work, no matter what I tried, and I looked at every way feasible to guarantee your anonymity when you vote by phone. There is no way to guarantee your anonymity. Somebody is going to know where that call is coming from, and somebody's going to know what buttons you pressed. So the bottom line was, I told Mr. Perot that even though you couldn't actually vote by phone, the value in it would be digital petition signing, where you would vet out your registered voters by vetting out, sorry to use technical terms. Oh, and by the way, it's techno-nerd, not techno-geek.
Oh, okay, okay. Go ahead, Gary.
You vet out your voters. In other words, you have them prove that they are registered voters in that county and at that address. Then you assign them a PIN code. Now, I've got a way of a really tricky PIN code that's it is impossible to steal. I won't go into how that works. But then you would have to pick up the phone, listen to a recording of why this county supervisor should be recalled or why this initiative should be placed on the ballot. Then you would have to listen to the con position of why he shouldn't be recalled or why this initiative shouldn't go on the ballot. Once you were fully informed, you would be allowed to touch tone in your PIN code and electronically place your signature on an initiative and referendum. That would speed up the people's power in initiative and referendum gathering in the 22, 23 states that allow initiative and referendum, and actually give the people to outrun the molasses slow political bureaucracy that would try and thwart their will. So if you've got a mayor or a county commissioner that's really going against the will of the people, you know, you don't worry about people coming in and torpedoing your petition by filling it up with out-of-county voters or unregistered voters. You know, 1/3 of the signatures get thrown out once they check the validity of them. And I still think that that would hold great value and actually bring a little power back to the people if you were allowed just to pick up the phone and legally, that's the key, and I know how to do that too, legally place your name on an initiative and referendum.
Okay, now you looked into the voting, the California state voting in just one county. This was Los Angeles County. Is that correct?
Los Angeles County, and it's 4.2 million registered voters, just a couple million less than the entire state of Florida.
Okay, and now this was 1994 for the Senate seat that Michael Huffington and Dianne Feinstein were running for. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now here's the question: how much fraud did you find in that vote? Those 4 million registered voters.
Well, number one, we were never able to prove actual voter fraud. What we have uncovered, and both political parties at the highest level are acutely aware of it, what we did uncover was massive voter registration fraud. Because just because I know for a fact that you're registered 3 or 4 times, sometimes within the same day or in the same week, it's difficult without actually having your signature analyzed and comparing it with the absentee ballot, of which the jacket is thrown away readily after the count is done, to prove that you actually voted that many times. But the intent to commit voter fraud is easily represented by the data when you compare it with any off-the-shelf anti-fraud software that any of the credit card companies use to make sure that, you know, people aren't getting multiple credit cards, you know, at their same address or in, you know, just a name that was changed by 1 digit. This is pretty readily available. It's just that the counties don't have the money to do it, and that's rampant. See, the federal government said, all right, all this voting registration, we're going to leave it up to each individual state. And then the state washed their hands of it and said, look, all right, we're going to make it up to every individual county. So it's difficult because every county has their own way of setting up the data. That means you have to analyze it on a county-by-county basis. But it seems to me, with as close as this election is, and as many states are just being won by razor-thin margins on either side, I can guarantee my fellow Christian listeners out there that our next president, no matter who it is, will be elected by people that voted more than once.
Wow.
That's the bottom line.
How many people did you find registered more than one time with just I mean, I looked at some, we're not allowed to give any names out, but I looked at some of the records that you have, and it's amazing that a U will then become an R, and that's the difference in the name. In other words, everything else is correct. Their first name, their middle name, their birth date, their address is all correct. But maybe just like I looked at one, the difference was one was a U, one was an R, but they were registered twice. But we have no way of knowing whether they voted twice, though.
No, and it's going to require a court order to look at the signatures at the different polling places to see if that really happened. But one thing's for sure, they very, very deliberately, you know, registered within a short period of time. And also there's a lot of innocent people that, and even good Christian, you know, women that will get married. They'll be receiving a ballot in the mail under their maiden name. They'll get married, and innocently, maybe they'll register again under their new married name, and they'll get 2 ballots.
And one could be an absentee ballot because they no longer live at the other address,
of course.
Correct?
And then you have, you know, a very pro-life candidate, you know, coming up locally for mayor or something, and she's holding on, and she knows that maybe she's in 2 different precincts, and she's so adamantly opposed to abortion that she commits a knowing felony by voting twice because somebody has handed her both ballots and held that carrot out in front of her. But that holds true for both parties.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And that's where I ran into problems. That's why the federal judge that looked at this data, I was not called as a material witness to explain the methodology behind how we analyzed all 4.2 million names, because I was requested by the Huffington team to place the party affiliation of that voter on the printout.
Right.
And that was after they asked me the question whether I was a conservative or a liberal. And I looked the man in the eye and said, I'm an American. And to me, voter fraud is voter fraud. I don't care if these poor people, some of them are poor people, some of them are outright fraud artists, and some of them are registered 10 and 12 times. Registering nursing home registrants and getting absentee ballots being put to another address is also a very, very favored way of going about this. And nobody that I'm aware of in this entire country, in any county of this country, has ever taken, including Santa Barbara County, and you've just had a very close election between Stoker and Capps. Stoker lost by 1%. Mm-hmm. And nobody has taken the 220 some odd thousand people that voted and see how many times they voted. I guess nobody really cares.
Well, is the expense warranted out to find out? I mean, that's what we're doing in Florida. We are expending millions and millions and millions of dollars for these recounts. And because it's for the President of the United States, even though they know that even these chads that are, now they just want to see if there's a slight bubble to it, they want to get it counted. I mean, that seems worth it to them because it's just so it's just so slided to one place that they can actually work this, and so it's not as expensive, even though it's millions and millions of dollars. It's costing, and even the people who are running Vice President Gore and Governor Bush both are appealing for money so they can keep this going. So isn't that the fact that they just don't have the money in this area to do something like what you did?
Well, if you pay absolute full retail for an analysis of credit card fraud or take any particular mailing list and you want to analyze it, the full retail rate is up to about 10 cents a name, and depending on how much, like everything else, there's a quantity discount. And if you bring in millions of records that need to be analyzed, you can sometimes negotiate it down to as little as a penny a name. But I guess it's not worth spending a penny a name for a county to make sure that everybody's voting once. It's too expensive.
Are we going to go to this, Gary, that we'll be going to this, that every time it's a razor edge, we're going to go and recount? Do you feel that this is the way we're going to go, or can we clean it up long before that?
Like I said, at least since 1994, both parties at the highest levels are aware of how rampant our registration rolls are with Deadwood, and Motor Voter even exacerbated it.
Motor Voter?
Yeah, Motor Voter, where you're given a registration form when you renew your driver's license.
Oh, yeah,
referred
right.
to as
Exactly.
Motor Voter.
I'm sorry, yeah.
That just exacerbated it. And most of the counties, and not just LA County, but Santa Barbara County is way up there with it, and most of the other counties in the United States, and I have no idea Florida's methodology, but in LA County, you could very innocently go in and put in a change of address for your voter registration, fill out the form, and if you simply put a period after your middle initial on one and not put a period after your middle initial on the other, you're registered twice. You can vote twice if you choose to.
Do you think that, let's just get into the psychological effect, because obviously you're a data guy and you're looking at all kinds of data. If you received, because everybody receives a voter guide. Everybody who's registered receives a voter guide. So if you receive multiple voter guides,
you know you can vote multiple times.
Yeah, right, exactly. So you as a Christian, and I'm only speaking to Christians because a big part of our audience is Christian, have a moral standard that you can't do that. Even though, even though the great scenario you gave, the greater need, we don't do that as Christians.
Stop abortion.
Right, we don't do that. We say, well, listen, we have to be right in our heart first before we can be right. But what you're saying, though, if you do receive multiple voter guides, you're going to get, the temptation is just too great,
It's
especially
tremendous.
if you want your thing. Whatever it
Especially
may
if
be.
you want to protect the lives of children.
Yeah, that is one. I agree with you, Gary. That is one that even in my house would be difficult to not vote twice. I've never done that in my life. I never sought to do that. I have never thought about voter fraud until you actually walked in my door today. I never knew it was this rampant. I had no idea. I had a feeling there's a reason why all these Democrats and these Republicans have swarmed down to South Florida to make sure the vote is right, because they must know something we don't know. And obviously they must have some of the data that you have gotten, that you have in front of you. Now you have reams of names, and you also have a spool of information that you gathered yourself, right?
The actual mainframe record of the possible people committing voter fraud. Remember, all I can do is show registration fraud, and some of it was purely innocent. Like I said,
Sure.
you just eliminating a period after your middle initial, and you put in a change of address, so you move and you re-register, but your mail's forwarded for 6 months, so all of a sudden the old address without the period comes to you on forwarded mail, and your current registration with the period comes to you, and now you're looking at a candidate that's very pro-life and a candidate that's very pro-choice, and you're looking at your two ballots. And I'm faced at a little bit greater degree with the same moral dilemma. If Bush is elected in Florida by what looks like it's 432 some odd votes right now,
Mm-hmm.
and I know for a fact there's got to at least be 10 times that many of people that have voted fraudulently, do I really want to take the risk of getting Mr. Gore in as president by exposing the voter fraud and possibly solely be the one responsible for allowing Gore to get in when Bush may have gone in?
Yeah, but I think the greater moral thing upon Christians, and I'm glad you brought this up, I think the greater moral thing upon Christians is we have to believe that God is God, and he will work out whatever needs to be worked out. Now, our prayer life and our own lives have to be there. We have to prayerfully consider everything and prayerfully pray for people who are elected, because kings are removed and brought in by God, and we have to believe that. Otherwise, we will have anarchy, will we not?
Yes, sir.
Okay, but I don't think we gave this number out, and I want to make sure that we give this number out. Now, you looked at 4,200,000 registered voters in L.A.
Yes, sir. That's what the computers analyzed. But I must point out that we only went what's known as 3 levels deep looking for fraud. You can go 10 levels deep.
How much fraud did you come up? How many multiple names did you come up with?
About 240,000. But our system was sloppy. There's a lot of those that are absolutely, you analyze it and you can see that some of them are, absolutely innocent. All I know is they're registered twice, like the example I gave about the woman who gets married and she gets 2 ballots. And now, I'm not going to say that this woman is not upstanding enough if she's, pro-life enough not to use it, but it's a felony. And so... Pardon me, we had several strategy meetings with the Huffington group, and the idea that Huffington was going to use, and I can let my imagination go wild as to why nobody ever pursued this, because it could cause a constitutional crisis. If they really start analyzing the close states, not just Florida, for voter registration fraud, and I'll tell you what.
Even California. It's close.
Even Santa Barbara County.
We've
got a congressional race that just missed. I did speak to Mr. Stoker yesterday regarding this, and he was afraid, politically afraid, strategically right. He was. I'll say that. I can understand strategically why he didn't want to start screaming voter fraud. It seems that people are perceived as being the crybaby. They don't have the data. They don't understand what solid footing they're on. Everybody realizes that it's there, but Perot used to always make the analogy of, the crazy ant in the basement that nobody wants to talk about.
Right.
But this particular crazy ant, maybe if these states are encouraged, and I wish I could, in good conscience, encourage your listeners to call Florida or at least call the Secretary of State and say, what are you doing? How do we know that our next president, whether it be Bush or Gore, comes out of that Florida election, was actually elected by people exercising their one person, one vote that's legal?
Right. Do you think, Gary, if you just joined us, I'm Jim Zimmer. This is a special broadcast of Christian Interviews Today. We're talking about the election, and Gary Tomlinson, who has looked into voter fraud and voter registration fraud, is an expert at this. This is not somebody who just, he's got the information sitting right in front of us. So we do have somebody with credentials here. He's looked into it already once and found quite a bit of it. But what this all does, Gary, my question is this: will this help clean up things, or will we still have status quo? Would you think that all this, the culmination of what's going on in Florida right now, and in about 10 minutes, the Secretary of State will make her press conference, so we'll know where she stands here in just a few minutes. But do you think that this will help clean it up? And do you think more Gary Tomlinsons will be called in to help clean this up?
Actually, it's not a number of Gary Tomlinsons. It's just one bank of mainframes and the raw data from every county. I mean, the work to it, this is simple stuff. Credit card.
But do you think the end result, do you think of all this that's happening, do you think the end result we'll start cleaning up the voting?
Well, if you're registered twice or three times at a couple of addresses and you got a couple of absentee registrations at some other addresses or P.O. boxes, which are famous for being used, you rerun the election, why not take a chance and vote multiple times again? The only way to do it, and this is where the potential of a constitutional crisis comes in, is to go through, clean all the rolls clean, verify citizenship, verify address, verify legal voting age and
so
status.
Show your driver's license or show an identification.
And I would put in much bolder print the penalties for voter fraud, make it an issue where people understand that, yeah, for once, since we started using computers to keep track of voter registration, which has been a very long time, that somebody will be using off-the-shelf anti-fraud software to make sure that you are registered once. Not saying there isn't some very clever people, but not as rampant as it is now. Okay. And if you do that, you're going to have to rerun the entire election. And
yeah, but we don't want that.
One of the two parties, well, I'm going to edit myself on what I was going to say. It doesn't matter what party the fraud is taking place in. I know because I set up the program. But I would insist, because if you get a lot of people running around ready to prosecute some mother of three for, you know, you got to offer them amnesty.
That's just how I say. We'll offer amnesty. Just clean up your act. I guess I believe
amnesty has to be offered because you need affidavits, just similar to the process they're going through in Florida. And if you don't think if Gore loses this thing, and it looks like he's going down to a few hundred votes, if you don't think that the Democrats are going to jump on this voter fraud, I just would like to have somebody objective look over their shoulder and just make sure that the data analysis is done properly. One party may stand to lose more than the other party, depending on which party has, you know, committed the more flagrant and discoverable voter fraud.
My hope is that we will clean this up, Gary. I mean, my hope is someday that...
Say a prayer.
Yeah, well, I've been praying about it ever since last Tuesday. It's been on my prayer list for sure. I want the right man to win. I want God's man to win. And I believe that most people are honorable, except for there are the few who would do these things. But they're the type that's been ripping off welfare and ripping off everything else anyway. So there's a consequence to their sin. But my hope is that this will clean up a lot of I think this should be exposed. I think a lot of this should be exposed. This is what's really going on. If you go into L.A. County with 4.2 million registered voters and find nearly 7% of them, 7% of the registered, you only went three levels deep. You didn't even go to the real serious.
Yeah, well, that's why that 7% may be high, because I only went 3 levels deep. But I guarantee you that you've got at least, I would say hardcore, at least a minimum of 0.5 to 1% of hardcore people that have voted time after time for as long as they can go back. And anytime you have, and you know what hurts more than on the national level, and this is such an important election, and I'm sure that your listeners understand that this upcoming president will be appointing up to 3 Supreme Court justices. Mm-hmm. Those 3 are either going to be appointed by Gore or by Bush. And the election is so close. At the start of the show, you mentioned good versus evil. Well,
it almost seems like that. I mean, it just, the way everything's going, it just seems like that.
I have a particular affinity for the yin-yang symbol, the representation of good and evil.
Right.
And with the margins of the Republicans being razor thin now in Congress and razor thin in the Senate, it seems to me this could be this nation's make or break point. We've got good and evil in absolute, almost perfect harmony, and it's going to either swing towards the right side, or that black is going to come around. And
wow, that I didn't look at it that way, but I think you're right, Gary. I think we are so close to that right now. And if you looked at the actual, what really was scary is if you looked at the United States map, only 20% of the land population voted for Gore. Nearly 80% of the land population, or the land mass, rather, of United States voted for Bush. That is incredible to think.
To watch some of the close election results. I mean, New Mexico now has got, what, less than 400 votes?
Yeah, it's about 400, yeah.
Once again, if I go into all of their county registration rolls and just send them through generic 4 or 5 level, analysis for potential fraud, I guarantee you I'll come up with at least 0.5 to 1%. That means that this next president is going to be solely elected by people that have voted more than once.
That's incredible to think. Well, folks, if you just joined us, this has been Christian Interviews Today. It's another special broadcast of Christian Interviews Today. We've been doing a lot of these during this voting time. My guest today has been Gary Tomlinson. Gary has been a distinguished man of the American Express Advocate Tech Group, which looked into fraud.
Advanced Technology Group,
excuse me, that looked into fraud for the American Express card. He's also helped with the looked into voter registration for the Feinstein-Michael Huffington election in 1994. A man who knows what he's talking about, and he's saying that no matter who gets elected, we'll definitely be elected basically by fraud.
The dark side.
No, yeah, it's incredible. Well, folks, keep your prayers going, keep things happening. Believe that God is truly on the throne and that good things will come of this election, and only time will tell. We'll know sooner or later who's going to be the President of the United States. I truly hope that Gary's wrong, that it will not be elected by fraud, but it will truly be put in there by God. Well, this is Jim Zimmer for Christian Interviews Today. Thank you so much, Gary, for dropping by. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Okay, you've been listening to, like I said, a special broadcast of Christian Interviews Today. Regular broadcasting will continue after this with R.C. Sproul and Renewing Your Mind. Maybe that's what we need, is a little renewing of our hearts and minds. God bless you. Goodbye, and I'll see you next time on the radio.
God bless.